Welcome to this last session of the day. My name is Irene Norstedt, and I am the Acting Director for the People Directorate in DG Research and Innovation. And I will be the moderator for this session this afternoon. I want to remind you that we are web streamed, and those of you who do not want to be seen need to sit in the back where it's dark. So, with that being said, I think we can start the real work. So, this session is called From Knowledge Exploration to Knowledge Exploitation. And it's an area which is quite close to my heart. It's really about how do we make sure that research results are really translated into economic and societal value. How do we make sure that we reach society with the results that we are generating, results and innovations? So that will be the topic of the discussions this afternoon. And we know that science-industry interactions are really widely recognized as one of the keys to foster innovation. And there has been a range of instruments that has been used to strengthen such knowledge transfer. We have, collaborative research, mobility programs, knowledge clusters, startup finance, schemes, etc., etc. But despite these efforts, there is still a lot that can be done. And there can be innovative ways of doing this. So it's another area for innovation, actually. We really would like to make an effort to make sure that everything that we do invest in, we invest European taxpayers' money. We want to make sure that they come to good for the citizens in Europe. So that is really what we're going to talk about today. We have a fantastic panel here that I will quickly introduce. So first we have Spela Stres, who is the head of the Center for Technology Transfer and Innovation at the Josef Stefan Institute in Slovenia. And she was also appointed by the UN Secretary General to serve on the 10-member group in support of the technology facilitation mechanism. And you're a patent attorney, I understand. Then we have Alison Campbell, who is the Director of Knowledge Transfer Ireland, and which is the national office responsible for policy practice and the performance of the Irish Knowledge and Technology Transfer Scheme. And she has also been CEO as the Medical Research Council, Technology UK, and director of several companies, and also an international advisor to different government departments. And she's an awarded tech transfer specialist. Then we have André Convents, who is section head for Connect and Develop at Procter & Gamble Services, and which is based in Belgium. He has more than 20 years experience at Procter & Gamble and has led the global multifunctional technology and innovation initiatives, expert on open innovation, and also strategic alliances and collaboration with universities, cultural exchange initiatives. And then, last but not least, we have Markus Vanko, who is the head of the Technology Transfer Office of the Institute of Science and Technology, IST, Austria, and is also the managing director of IST Cube, which is a seed fund investing in Austrian science and technology spin-off, and he has a background in venture capital, the European Investment Fund, and in strategy consulting. And he has supported a broad range of startups in process, energy, and tech industries. So now you have the panel here, and I will kick off by asking them for some short statements here. It's a very general question. So how you see your organization working in this field? What are you doing to facilitate knowledge transfer between science and industry? We start with Spela.
Thank you. So I would say that we do things in a strategic way, and we do them on the day-to-day basis. Strategically, first of all, we need to provide good research results. And then on the other hand side, we need to assure that we enable capable technology transfer staff at our institution. And then concretely on a day-to-day level, there are very many even prosaic things that need to be done, like drafting of the documents that should be done by the technology transfer office, the time limit that should be observed in case that the researchers want to publish their articles. One other thing is that it's important for the researchers to have the proof of concept funding available at hand once they decide to go for the commercialization steps. And a professionally managed and result-oriented proof of concept fund is of crucial importance. Then things like financial remuneration for the researchers in case the commercialization is successful. But most of all, it's very important that the peers recognize the success of the researchers in the commercialization steps. And in that sense, a lot of publicizing of the commercialization results should be done. So I'm not saying that we're a perfect organization, but we're striving to do these things in such a way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Same question to you, Alison.
Gosh, well, I'm in a really fortunate position because the role that I have, as we were saying, is a pan island role, and ultimately what we're trying to achieve is to make it simpler for industry and for entrepreneurs to engage with publicly funded research in our universities and our institutes, which is very easy to say, and actually there's a lot that sits behind that to make it happen. And to echo Svella's words, we're certainly not perfect, but we do have a whole, program running where we're looking at both supporting the technology transfer offices in the institutes to make sure that they have adequate resourcing to undertake technology transfer. And we're also looking at, and we have put in place various frameworks and really practical resources that just make it easier for companies and entrepreneurs to understand how to engage with the research system and give them some practical tools to do that.
Thank you. Andre?
Cool, so maybe I'll add perspective of a large corporate. No large corporate has really the capability to do innovation or change or an impact on their own. How big the company is. So we have to always collaborate. There's more smart people outside the large company than inside. So that means we need to partner, and we always try to partner with across different partners, whether it's in value chain with universities. And then also with startups or institutions. And of course, especially now where startups are kind of the new force to change or impact societal change. So that's really a requirement if it's a large corporate. If you want to survive in the future, these partnerships are critical. But at the same time, it's a symbiosis. So if we partner with, for instance, a university, we need to, find a similar language to talk about common topics, and two, we want to learn from each other. We want to learn what's new in the science to see how we can apply it, and at the same time, especially with the universities, then the academic research tries to understand what are the pains and the opportunities that we have both in society but also in corporations.
Okay. Thank you. Michael?
So I came out of curiosity, but also out of gratitude, actually. Gratitude to the European Union and Commission, because 10 years ago, our institution didn't exist at all. IST Austria is a relatively brand new research institution. We have 700 people now, 60 research groups, roughly. More than half have an ESC grant. We have Marie Sklodowska-Curie programs. We have proof of concept grants. We have EFRE funding for the tech park nearby. So basically in everything that we do, there is some component of European Union funding. And I think that's, at least for me, important to say here. And I think we are really quite happy about that development. What we do in terms of an institution, I think is probably more geared, more as Andrea also indicated, towards supporting startups rather than industry cooperation, and that obviously will be an interesting discussion, I think, to have. We founded a fund, you mentioned IST Cube, which is a seed fund, pan-Austrian, so in a way a similar role, maybe from a different perspective as Alison, since we are not looking only at our institution, but at everything that comes out of Austria, and really try to support researchers who want to do basically that big step into founding something and then developing it.
Okay, thank you. It's time to engage you a little bit here, and we're going to do the low-tech version here. So I'm going to ask you to put up your hands, because we would like to see a little bit who you are before we continue the discussions here. So how many of you come from a public research organization? Okay, so about a quarter of you.
Yeah.
And how many come from private sector, including industry? Okay, a few. And how many of you from public administrations? Okay, very good. There were a few who maybe didn't put up their hands. Maybe they want to stay secret. What do I know? So let's ask, how many of you are actually sitting on research results that you think could be exploited for societal or economic benefit? Quite a few. And a mixture from different organizations, we can see that. And how many of you have really found the right partnership to go forward? Okay, there is a need
an
here.
opportunity, yes.
Interesting. So this is clear that there is a need here. So let's continue to pursue this a little bit then. So maybe to Marcus and Spela, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you think are the biggest challenges for transforming research results, into, whatever type of product that could be, or methodology, whatever, which is really, really used. And also, what kind of obstacles do you see that researchers, normally find when they try to go forward?
Can we ask the audience first?
Of course.
There were the ones who said that they
that
had
means that we
results.
need a microphone now.
They had results, but they couldn't find the right partner. There were some of those, but there
Yes.
were others who had different problems.
So I'm looking for a microphone.
Was it a financial
They had this
issue?
cube, which
Well, because
So here in the front, maybe, if you don't mind sharing. It should be working now.
Hello? Yeah.
Yes.
great.
Thank you for the question. My name is Hege Brende. I'm leading a large research center on hydropower technology from Norway, also globally. And we have exactly that issue, is that we have a lot of research results which we can bring into more the innovation commercialization phase. And that's kind of the more easy part, is actually to identify the result, maybe do an IPR and patenting process. But then in order to actually find the right partners that can commercialize it, that is always a huge effort. Sometimes it's the funding, the classic this gap, where you need very funding intensive period in order to make it a proper concept that you can actually present for a market. And some of it is actually that some large corporations are not very good at identifying the potential, even though they might be the ones who's the best ones to take it further. And the small ones doesn't have the muscle or the competence in order to bring it to the market.
Okay.
It's a good summary.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to share? Those of you who put your hands up. Anybody else? No?
Well,
So then?
but I would say that that's a typical answer, that you have. I mean, from my point of view, there's the first step that's also a bit problematic. Obviously, not with the people that are attending this session, because they are interested in commercialization. But sometimes, and in many cases, there is this researcher's attitude And researchers, in any case, need to devote a significant amount of time to commercialization to make it succeed. So if you don't have a researcher, if you don't own a researcher in that sense, there's not much you can do. But once you have the researcher on your side, then you have two types of problems. Either you don't find the right partner, or you don't have the right type of financing to pursue the TRL level uplift to the right level to be somehow accepted by the big companies. So proof of concept financing, again, can be seen as a solution here. And we have to say that the European Investment Fund has put up more than 40 technology transfer proof of concept funds in Europe since 2007. And there's a huge amount of money in that. There's 1.7 billion in commitments. But frankly, 40 is not enough. And most of them are centered in the western part of the Europe. So if you compare results on the Global Innovation Index for 2018, you see that you have the western and the eastern countries which level up in terms of articles per billion in GDP. Then the central to eastern part of Europe drops in terms of research industry collaboration and in particular in VC deals. So venture capital is missing, and the most could be done with proof of concept financing. So there's still some homework to be done in that sense.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I would agree, I think, with everything that Bela said. And maybe I can add one thing. I think for taking a research result into something that actually creates impact, what you need is you need one person who actually does that. And the question, I think, is one, to find that person, and second, to see what the right setting for that person is, because that needs to be a person who is 100% committed to making this happen and needs to be able to take decisions, right? Because there's a myriad of decisions coming on the way. And what we thought a bit about is, and that's sort of, it's not a dilemma between these two, I think, right? Industry or startups, but for me it comes down to the question, what is the right setting for that particular person, right? Is that as a founder, or is that as a member of an R&D department in a large corporate, right? And we're obviously talking about a lot of different types of cases, and it's hard to give, I think, one answer to everything. But on average, I would think that having the setting of a startup where you have a founder in a sort of VC-backed setting, you give a lot of freedom to that particular person, right? And also the incentives are there to make that person really work hard, which is, I think, quite different. I'm obviously interested how P&G is doing this, but compared to a setting in a large corporate. That's not true for everything, I think, but that person and the right setting for that person, I think, is critical.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. It's go back to people and people talking the same language. And there's a very different language and way of working when you're doing research versus trying to create a company and build a company. And even another language if you try to do a collaboration with a large corporate. It's different worlds, and the being aware of that is important. And of course, from the corporate side, what we as corporates try to do in full humbleness is trying to start to learn the language of a startup. The researchers in large corporations, they understand the researchers at the research level, but to create a company is something very different. And then especially at the university, what we see, there is sufficient funding available right now. Funding is no issue, but finding people who want to lead the creation of something marketable from a research result is something different and more difficult, because it has a human aspect, it has a finance aspect, and it has a technology aspect. And finding these and creating these is the bottleneck today in many cases. And so that is a prerequisite to then actually work with a corporate to do a proof of concept. But in today's world, the advantage is that you have so many options to valorize technology, more than in the past. So there is a way you can do startups, you can do it on your own, you can do it with corporate or some kind of mix. So as the entrepreneur starts the technology valorization, there is never a case that there is only one customer. There's always opportunities which are broader. But typically, the researcher at the university, that is not, unless they want to become entrepreneur, that is not their passion, nor their interest. And so that means they need to have some kind of partnership where the people have the passion to do that. And that's more the bottleneck than, I think, some of the other aspects.
Spela, you wanted to add something?
It all starts and ends with people. That I think we all agree of. In creating the startups, a researcher that wants to transfer to the business world is of utmost importance. But there is the majority, fortunately or unfortunately, that's how it is, of researchers that would not like to transfer to the entrepreneurial world. And we need to assist those as well. And my personal belief is that there is some key issue with the technology transfer professional in there, with the person that would actively search for proper or suitable partners, and then have the researchers say yes or no, make all the decisions, but to offer all the support necessary to the researchers to do business with the outer world. So I think there is this crucial moment of the technology transfer professional, a profession that has not been, as of yet, fully acknowledged.
Okay.
Maybe an important point. So there's one area on startup, but the other aspect is also between corporations or other organizations and the researcher. The opportunities is there to almost have an open door, where you have almost continuous interaction between the people who are in the field in applications and the people who do research. Because that interaction is crucial for the development of technology which is really relevant and useful. And that's where you have tools like we developed some of the called master collaborative agreements with some universities, where you have an umbrella of agreements so you don't have to worry about all the paperwork and so on. And then you will have the researchers talking to each other. Because the scientists like to talk to the scientists in corporates, right? If you have some experts in fluid dynamics or so, you have them in large corporates and they work on tubes and pipes in plants. And then if fluid dynamics in the research environment, you want these people to exchange learnings because the research, they want to do relevant research, and then the researchers in the corporate, they want to be at the edge of the science. And having these collaborations and structurizing there's opportunities there. We've tried to do that with master collaborative agreements, but if there is ways to make that easy to keep the paperwork out of the door of the professors and the researchers, that's a huge opportunity.
Okay. Alison, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I love the P&G model and have done for a number of years, but I think it's one that's really for the few and not the many, really. But I think to the sort of key point, and I think we're hearing it echoed across the panel, there is a gap and possibly a chasm between the potential opportunity and where it's going to get to and how it's going to get there. And it differs for different opportunities. But I think for me, the key thing is that a lot of opportunities that are emerging are really early stage. The world of technology valorization has moved on quite considerably. Companies and investors are not looking for those very early stage opportunities now because they're too risky. And we've heard colleagues on the panel actually say, oh, we're working with the startup because the startup is a vehicle to de-risk the proposition, but to create the startup you need the entrepreneurial people or the will or the impetus to do that. So I'd pull it back a little bit and say quite often it's about not just looking at what that technology opportunity could be, but actually the researchers in parallel with the tech transfer office. But think about it, millions of researchers, very few technology transfer officers. They can't be everything to everybody. Really getting engaged in the process of understanding what that value proposition is. engaging the researchers, engaging with industry or people in the market to understand what the value proposition could be or could become. And then in some situations, it's actually not right for the researcher to be developing that because they're a really good researcher and now we're into a development phase. So I think we really have to think about how do we get some of that development work done when we know what it is that needs to be done and who should be best placed to do that. But the key thing for me is about de-risking at various points in the process, and I think that's a challenge that we've got to crack.
So basically what you're saying is that you kind of need to find the right idea at the right level of maturity and the right person to take it forward. But if you're a young researcher in a university, you may not have a technology transfer office, and you have this brilliant idea. What would you recommend them to do?
Well, I personally, if I just chip in, there's this, well, first of all, there's an incredibly good resource called the web. So I think the first thing I'd have a researcher do, and actually there's an enormous skill set that they've got, and it's called research, is to put those two together. And actually, I'm sounding quite flippant, but in all seriousness, if there is a good idea, there's lots of resources out there that can really help, I think, a researcher to think around this issue. Whether it be guidance around what's intellectual property, how do you protect it, why do you do any of that, to the other end of the spectrum, what else is out there that's in this area that I'm looking for? And often you don't need to look at proprietary databases because there's just so much information out and publicly available. It's quite easy to find your way around. The other thing that I'd really suggest researchers do is to both pay heed to the publications that are out there, think widely both in their direct discipline and around it, and look at who's publishing, because often the authors may be based in a company. They are potentially the competitors or the people who might want to partner with or who might want to take a license. And then look at the IP databases, look at a SPASnet in Europe, see who's filing patents in certain areas. That gives you lots of ideas about how you might position your idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I second this, because if you're a nanomaterial scientist or a high energy physicist, it's obvious that you have a lot of capability and capacity. So it's not a very complicated process, but it is a process and it takes a lot of time. So the problem that we need to acknowledge is that the researcher that is capable of doing it on his or her own is in the end not going to do that on his or her own. So that's the reason why we need the technology transfer support to actually do the stuff that the researcher, well, he can do it, but he's not meant to do it because his main task is to do the research.
Okay.
So if you are really if you're a really young researcher in an institution that doesn't have a tech transfer office and you have a great idea, then I think number one, you should go to your board of trustees and tell them to actually start a tech transfer office. I think that would be number one thing. The second thing is that, although I don't think that it should be seen too legalistically, but talking to a patent attorney and actually getting a couple of €1,000 from your president to actually support the work of a professional patent attorney is also helpful. But I think this is actually the minority of cases because all the institutions that I've come across do have tech transfer offices. So I think it's much more about the relation between researchers and industry and these offices.
And the other, at least in experience as entrepreneur, there's more and more tools available to see whether the researchers have really interest, what is something they want to do. So there, a lot of regional organizations have evening sessions where the entrepreneurs talk how they work, and then you can do networking to see how to start up a company and all the tricks and you need to do for that. There's always, when it's a certain topic, if you're in the medical field, you have hackathons over the weekend. So all kind of efforts nowadays where if you feel it burning as a researcher, then going to these gives you a flavor on whether you want to have it, continue that. And so once you have that flavor, then there's a whole network of people who can help you on how to set up a company, how to do IP, when and how, which is very, in the company, how starting IP is very different from tech transfer at university. In tech transfer, you have a pool of money, you make choices on where you put your pick fencing over your IP. In a startup, doing IP, starting a patent, it's money where you start ticking, because 18 months later you have to pay 5K and then so on. So doing a startup and starting your company with your technology, it has all kind of different way of working, and having a network helping you, it's fabulous. And many universities, the good universities, are providing that. On top of the tech transfer has this network, and then if they see the people showing up in these evening sessions around start your company or something like that, they're putting in this network to help, and then you foster them and grow them. So that's really emerging very fast.
I'd like to just support something that Svella said earlier on, and it does go to the point of, well, what your question, what if a researcher doesn't have a technology transfer office, or it could be that there's one person who's responsible for the entire university. Funding to support technology transfer offices is a game changer in this space. We saw it in Ireland about 10 or 12 years ago, where we nationally injected funding into the universities to help build a technology transfer capability within some of the institutions. And there was a serious inflection point in terms of valorisation. If you look at what's happened perhaps more recently in France through the SAT network, where they have reached out regionally to support institutions who didn't have any technology transfer capability locally, they've similarly seen an inflection point. So I would say that's something that needs to have some serious consideration. And often it's very popular to fund an initiative for a short period of time. But this is actually about a sustained level of funding. And sadly, not all universities throughout Europe are well positioned in order to make that level of investment. So it means that it's not necessarily a level playing field, I think, throughout all member states.
Mm-hmm.
And the other big game changer building on that is, in the past, academic institutions, they were rewarded by the number of publications and education. And that is changing, because much of the reward is also, if you do a startup, it's a driver and it's a reward. And that changes also with the researchers, the intention or the willingness to develop IP and to valorize. And so it has been already for several decades in the US, but in Europe it's starting to be very well established in most universities. You have a ranking, as you know, a ranking of most innovative universities in the world, and so it's actually a different. When you look at the ranking, it's shifting around, and you have some very good universities who are top 10 in Europe. For instance, in Leuven University, which is ranked from education, I think 39 in the world, something like that. Don't misquote me, but it's the most innovative university in Europe, and I think it's 4 in the world or so.
Of course, they do have 49 people in their technology transfer office.
Yes.
So first of all, there's a gentleman over there that wants to ask something.
So we have several people who want to come in here. So we start here, and then we have you. Okay.
Of course, I agree with all the previous speakers. I'm Gerard Cornet, by the way. I'm the head of the network of industrial liaison officers in the Netherlands. I want to mention another aspect. The role of the researcher. I think what's important is that we acknowledge that, of course, a researcher doesn't feel it as his prime responsibility to transfer technology. That's a bit of a problem, especially if you are working in an institute for fundamental science, talking about astronomy or particle physics. So if you don't have, by the way, our industrial liaison officers are working in these research institutes for fundamental science, and if you don't have a technology transfer office, then you have really a problem. So for the researcher, there is no incentive in his busy job to also look at IP or the World Wide Web to find partners. So there should be somewhere in the system a incentive made by the European Commission, I don't know, but what holds for the researcher also holds for its institute. In my experience, an institute will not invest in technology transfer because the funding is already low for fundamental science. And we know also that I think the innovative power from fundamental science, the innovative power is high. And it's not exploited enough to my feeling, my experience. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good question. So could you share with us maybe some ideas about incentives that really could help driving this forward? Spela, I see you're nodding.
Legally speaking, there are incentives. If an IP gets sold or licensed for a certain amount of money, then the researcher, I think in every country in Europe, I'm not sure about Italy and Sweden though, but in all of the others, the researcher gets a share of the income, and it goes up to 1/3 of the income. So if the patent gets sold for 3 million, the researcher would get 1 million, and that's an incentive in itself, I would say. But many institutions also do a lot of publicizing the efforts and the successes in technology transfer, and that makes a whole lot of a difference as well. Some research agencies even demand from their researchers to state whether they have participated in spin-out creation, and they get extra points for that. So there are incentives that are far past just article production. But I would second that without a researcher you can hardly do anything. And I remember a long time ago when I started knocking on the doors of the researchers, and the only response I ever received at that time was doors slammed into my face. Honestly and seriously. But it was the humble professionalism of the technology transfer professionals that changed that attitude. And today, the attitude of the researchers is not like that anymore. They come knocking on our doors. And I would second what Alison said. It's the money invested in technology transfer that is the game changer. Because some say, technology transfer, oh, this is the industrial part of financing. And the others say, oh, but this belongs to the research part of financing. And it doesn't. It should be acknowledged as a separate strategic investment. I think some countries did that, and it paid off, right, Alison?
Mm-hmm. Two incentive changes that you could have and would make a phenomenal difference. And again, it's something that can be seen. Number one, which is really hard to actually live up to in practice, although sometimes institutions think that they've managed it because of the words that they use, is actually career progression for the researcher based on their activities within valorisation. It's still fundamentally about quality research outputs, quality in teaching, and then if you're lucky, there's another box which is about all the other stuff that you might do. And sometimes there's a fourth, which is administration. But actually genuinely seeing people promoted for these kinds of activities, I think is a great incentive for researchers. The other thing that certainly we've seen, and it's not just an Irish phenomenon, it's in other countries, and I think through activities in the Commission as well, is the power of the research funder. If the funders are requiring certain outputs, or at least encouraging them and perhaps celebrating or even rewarding them beyond the scholarly output, that's a real incentivizer in terms of where researchers are going, and most importantly, how their institutions are supporting them to get there. Because as we've heard from the floor, researchers want to go there, they just need the support network around them.
Marcus?
Yeah, I think this incentives question is super relevant. And basically, I mean, I don't want to repeat what you just said, Alison, but I'm not sure it's really down to the money. So we've got the similar provision, as you said. In our case, actually 40% of the profits from commercialization go to the group of inventors, which is really rather high. I'm not sure it makes a big difference, right? I think what people care about most has a lot to do with what you said about career progression and what are the real incentives. And there it really is helpful to look at the different cohorts that we are dealing with, right? We have graduate students who basically have their career decision in front of them, and that's a completely different situation compared to somebody who is in the scientific faculty track, right? We have people who are basically before a tenure decision where everything they work towards is tenure. And there, if there is this third box, and which we do have, by the way, have people done something in terms of translation, it is certainly helpful. And for tenured professors, the situation is still different. So I think it really helps to think, and I have a lot of sympathy with you because I come from a basic research institute as well. We have the same questions, right? And think hard about the type of incentives to have.
But there's a slightly different angle also. So indeed, there's what you mentioned, the startup and the tech transfer. But in Europe, there's a huge opportunity for researchers to do more applied research in partnership. And because on the one hand, the researchers, those who can get an ERC grant, it's fabulous. It's like the top of, it's like Champions League of the, sorry, football analogy, but it's Champions League of researchers if you get an ERC grant. That's highly competitive. But then you have, separate from that, you have all these Horizon programs, which require typically a kind of a consortium with SMEs, corporates, universities, and institutes. And that is a huge pot of money. It is highly rewarded in academia if you get a grant of this or being partner of it. And that's a huge opportunity to start at least the valorization of some of your research. And then beyond that, so you have the Horizon program, but then you have the PPPs, the public-private partnerships, which require really the top science to come in. And these is unique in Europe. I have not seen that in other geographies. And it's a really unique way for academic research to be fully embedded into a broader consortium of partners, where also the IP arrangements are very well designed, right? It's basically from Commission point of view of the template, where it's fairly clear on how this will be worked. So that's, I think, to me, next to the SME program for startups, it's a gem in Europe, which really allows, especially for researchers, to step up what they're doing in a way which also provides funding for their researchers.
And soon you will have the EIC as well, no?
Yes, so the EIC program, yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. We have a question here. You can have the mic.
Hi, thank you, the panel. I'm Stefano Benvenuti from Fondazione Teleton in Italy. We fund research on rare genetic diseases, and because we were built on mandate by patients, it's really in our mission to be sure that the research results move forward to the development of treatment that reach the patients. So what we've done was to create a technology transfer office, and my comment is that we should be very clear what a technology transfer office is, because we have universities in Italy with 2 people in the tech transfer. What they basically do is to put in contact the researcher with a patent attorney, and that's it, because they are too few for the amount of results they have to manage. What we do, or what we think should be done, is to really accompany the researchers through the development of the project to be sure that those results can be exploited, because not all the results can be exploited, but also depending on how you run your research project, those results could be better, so more valuable or less valuable. and then to accompany them also in engaging with partners, because you cannot ask researchers to sit down with lawyers and negotiate a deal with GSK. That's not for the researchers.
It's not for GSK either.
I mean, you need somebody that trying to mediate and try to accompany this process. So I think that just to say technology transfer, there are very different ways we intend technology transfer, and I think, as you mentioned, a true investment in technology transfer is needed to allow university and research centers to have big enough and capable enough technology transfer.
Well, do you know what we've done in our country? Because we surely don't have enough money for this. And so although I said, woo, we invested in technology transfer, we when we initially did that, we didn't have all of our higher education institutes involved. So then we said, well, we need to get them involved, but there's no extra money. What are we going to do? So it was the challenge of how do we scale. So we then formed or encouraged our institutes to form into consortia. So we have perhaps the more mature and experienced institutions and their offices working with smaller institutes who may have, let's be honest, somebody who's spending a day a week actually paying attention, or at least one person full time, but that's just not enough. It's by no means perfect. I'd love to see so much more in the system, but there are flexible ways, and for me a lot of it's actually about being able to find ways of sharing expertise and experience, whether it's nationally driven, whether it's locally, regionally driven. We were hearing Marcus saying, he's not just wedded to serving one university. But I think we have to look at perhaps more mechanisms to share expertise and maybe to then develop some kind of scaling, but on an economy of scale and on an economy of investment throughout Europe.
And I think there's another thing important, I hope Alison will agree. When you invest money into technology transfer, it's not enough to invest money, you also need to set up some reference frame or you define the results that you want to see coming out of the money you have invested. And that part differs around Europe, because there are countries where the industries operate in a way that they would buy patents or license. And there are countries where the industry operates in a different way and they would prefer contract or collaborative research. And depending on that and depending on the logic of the financing authority, you should know whether you're striving for more contract or collaborative research or for more sold patents, for more licenses. Are you going for the national industries or for the worldwide industries? Then also the European Commission should be careful whether to fund or not the transfer of knowledge overseas, wherever. So there are a lot of political issues in here as well, but some kind of a framework for results should also be attached to the money.
There are some elements about the structure of the tech transfer industry that are quite peculiar, I think. I think you have to think about it as a bundle of little monopolistic structures, right? It's not true for every, but most tech transfer offices are actually monopoles, right? Typically, a researcher doesn't have the choice to go to the next university's tech transfer office and have it commercialized there because they are just better, right? And there are, good and bad elements about monopoles, but I think the advantage of this is that the exchange in the industry is really great, right? So if you want to be part of that exchange, I think there are myriads of opportunities. There is there is an email list for the directors of tech transfer offices where they really exchange and re-exchange all our issues that we are thinking about, which you would never do in a competitive industry, right? There are other elements which are maybe not so good about that structure, but I think that's a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah, and for large companies we prefer to deal with professional tech transfers, right? Because then you have the same language and it's professional and you can make a deal. The other thing which is strange sometimes is typically when you negotiate a deal, the two parties at both sides of the table, they want to have the outcome because they're incentivized for it. In some cases, the tech transfer has no kind of incentive to make a deal or not deal. And sometimes the professor, yes, he wants to some funding, but that is sometimes very, very difficult to work with. And so that's so the more the tech transfer of a university is professionalized, the better it is, and then you can start doing next level things like some of the things we've done with associations of large companies, where you have 20 large companies and the professors just come and pitch, this is what I'm doing, is there potential interest. So once you have that, then you can move that to the next level.
Okay. We have another question here in the front.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is working.
Microphone here.
But I think it's a really interesting discussion. And what I think is really interesting also is that
Hang on, wait. Seems it's not working. Maybe you come up and you say your question here.
Yeah, maybe
Save
there
some
it's
time.
easy. Yeah.
As you're sitting there.
I think it's really interesting discussion, and also I think it's interesting to see the tech transfer as a unique player and stakeholder in the whole value chain, whereas just something supportive. Because where I come from, you look at it more like a service, not as a specific part of the value chain. So I think that's something which is a really important takeaway. And also the push versus pull factor, whereas now it's like the inventor or the researcher has to kind of push his ideas onto some tech transfer professional agent, rather than have incentives like you were mentioning, where the tech transfer as an important actor in the value chain actually also has a pull and push themselves in order to realize new concepts.
And for companies like us, it's also a pull. We love to see the researchers' pitches very early. But of course, it has to be in a professional way. I mean, we don't want for instance, we don't want the researcher to come and share with us confidential information without having agreements and so on. So it needs to be transparent, clear, and clean. And that's where the tech transfer can help and talk to the researcher. Because of research, what is a confidential disclosure agreement one way? What is two way? This is all not very clear for him or her. And having that as a translator will help us. And then there's a lot of pull from companies to willing to find new solutions.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because it leads us into exactly this demand side, because we talked a lot about the tech push side here, that often it's new innovation coming, seeking to go further. But are you also working from the other side, that there is a societal demand for innovations in this particular area? Do you actively go out and scout for those ideas? Who would like to?
For us as a large company, absolutely. We, of course, there's the new trends. There's basically two areas we're looking at in grand scheme of things. One is, how do we reinvent our current businesses, with the new technologies which are coming at us as a speed and a cost which is unprecedented? Whether it's microbiome, artificial intelligence, IoT for production plants and so on. These new technologies we have to embed on how we work. And it's not an if, it's we need that. And so the best way to do that is to work with external partners who have built it, typically research or startups, to work together and jointly grow our business. So that's one. But the other area, and that's much more complicated, are businesses which are potentially disrupting an existing business today. And so whether you have digital solutions, whether if you have a taxi business versus Uber, it is a disrupting business which in 5 or 10 years could replace what you're doing today. Companies need to be aware of that and learn how this will change. And this is a second way where we're actively looking for example solutions where we can collaborate to potentially scale these solutions with complementary skills. And so, yeah, we are demanding for solutions, not really being pushed to it.
Okay.
Of course, there are some challenges, I think, for all of us. And if we look at the different landscape throughout Europe, we're differently configured in respect of the kinds of companies that we have based in different countries. And so for those of us who have a very large SME base, I think it can be quite challenging as we look to the demand side, because quite often those companies aren't really demanding enough of the research system because they're trying so hard to simply survive. And so there's quite a lot that needs to be done, not necessarily from a university level, but needs to be done at a kind of national and pan-national level to really encourage, and of course it is, but really encourage those smaller companies to think about engaging in research development and innovation in order to drive them forward. So we can't simply wait for the pull and the demand to come to us. We really have to intervene and develop that environment where those companies really want to engage. And then I think that's to a point that was being made earlier about what is it that you want to achieve from all of these processes? Because for some institutions, it's about revenue return from these kinds of activities. For others, it's about engagement. For others, it's actually about talent flow and job opportunities for their students. So we need to have some clarity as to why we're engaging in these activities, both at institutional, national and European level. In Ireland, we've got a national policy for research commercialisation, so it makes it very clear for everybody to understand. It's about get public research out there and used for societal and economic benefit. Generate some return, certainly, but don't let that dominate. And because we know that, we can work within that framework. But it becomes quite challenging because it means that we then don't necessarily stack up when you start to look at international comparators. Because if we look to certain institutions in the US who are making megabucks, we may not be. Does that mean we're doing a good job? Does it mean we're doing a bad job, both nationally and as European citizens? So I think there's quite a lot to think about when we think about the demand side and how we want to respond to it.
Marcus, you want to add something?
On the political level, I think should be clear what the purpose of transfer is. I mean, each and every institution could decide to sell the patents for their own increase of financing, but on the political level, if we take into account where the majority of the money for the research comes from, it's public funding. So on the political level, it should be clear to all these institutions that it's the purpose is to get public research out there to be used for societal benefit. And from that point of view, it would be easier within Europe to set a system that would be really cooperative between the researchers, the industry, and the technology transfer offices as a player.
We have a few minutes left, and I will ask each one of you to think if you have a magic wand. If there's sort of one policy action or any other type of action you feel that should be done at European level to stimulate the transfer of results, what would that be? If you could wish freely. Marcus, we'll start with you.
Just one.
I would think between two different answers. The one is, and that has come up, I think, during the discussion here, is dedicated funding, and it's, sorry, again, about money, for technology transfer. I think we are in a situation where there is dedicated funding in a variety of forms for research, and obviously for types of cooperative research that then goes to the industry partner or to the research institution. But typically, at least I haven't found a magic source, and maybe the wand is a help for that, for funding for actually the transfer work, right? Yeah. I'll save the second one because maybe somebody needs it.
Okay. Andre?
So I think the opportunity in Europe is a fairly compact continent. Many different industries very close to each other. Top research institutions very close to each other. So, and we know even Silicon Valley is a good example. Silicon Valley was created basically by investment in the army and then having companies create solutions for it. So we have this huge opportunity to build a fantastic ecosystem, and the ecosystem needs 4 elements to really work to each other. We need to have the research. We need to have then the translation of this research, it could be RTOs and so on. And we need to have the corporates, and we have a very vibrant startup community. And if they can work together in a very fluent way, then you create a strength which goes beyond IPR. It is an ecosystem. It's basically an ecosystem which creates value for a long time, for generations, based on just expertise which reinforces each other. And so there are some examples where some regions start to do that, but it would be a dream to do that across Europe. And especially with our very diverse types of industry, we go from healthcare to chemistry to concrete and so on. We have that, and that's, for instance, different from Silicon Valley, where it's high digital focused, but we can do something bigger and larger potentially.
I'd say look across Europe and potentially more widely, but I think we've got enough to draw on in Europe. Look across Europe to see what's been established, what interventions have been put in place, and where real success lies. And then look to see if those models can be shared and adapted.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you.
I have so many wishes.
Okay.
But let's put it in 3, so 3 wishes. The first one would be to enable technology transfer as a profession. And I would be glad to see that as an upgrade of the Commission's recommendations. Then my second wish would be to make sure that the proof of concept financing is available throughout Europe. Not just the most prominent institutions, and then the buzz goes around that it's everywhere. It's not everywhere. Proof of concept financing is not available everywhere throughout Europe. And the third one is a little bit poetic. I would wish that different support actions like digital innovation hubs, Enterprise Europe Network, technology transfer offices, EPO Pad Libs, key enabling technology centers, IPR help desk, that all of that would come to a point where they would be capable of offering a seamless support to the researchers and industry alike.
Okay. Marcus, do you want to add, or did your second one, was it covered?
No, the second thing I wanted to mention is actually about the EIC, which I think could really really help with many of the issues that we currently have. I think what has worked on the ERC side, which is really significant funding for excellent research, working not only as sort of as the supply of funds, but really as a quality badge, right, which has really worked out extremely well. If this can be translated to the EIC side, right, where we actually get also sort of a quality badge on innovation and innovative ideas, if this works out the way it's anticipated, I think it will be great.
Yeah, it's amazing. Those who were in the session before with Manuel and the EIC and the booklets they published yesterday, the results just over 2 years are amazing from an impact point of view. So I fully agree. It's really a nugget that can be further grown.
And I'd just like to say one thing in closing, just to pick on Strad very quickly. In terms of a technology transfer profession, we do have one. Please don't leave thinking that we don't. And there is actually an international standard and a qualification called RTTP that people in the profession have. If there was something that we could do to really develop and embed that a bit more, it's a super quality standard, not just for individual institutions, but actually for countries to have.
Thank you. I think we have learned quite a lot, and really the importance of the technology transfer office and what you can support from there, and to create this more seamless environment and ensure funding for the proof of principles. And across Europe, we shouldn't forget the equal aspect, to make sure that we can harvest the best possible science we can across Europe and try to get that into valuable results that will benefit the citizens. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to you. We have come to the end of this session. I'm sure you're sitting on a lot of questions, and I'm sure there is some coffee or tea or something outside where you can continue to discuss. It was a very interesting session. I wish we had another hour, but I'm afraid this is it. Thank you so much.